And I'm going to say hello and welcome. And this is actually part two of the presentation, or I should say a continuation of the presentation that I made in back in March on developing holonic consciousness, and to go a little bit further down our rabbit hole of our exploration of new ways of thinking about consciousness. I want to give us some housekeeping and some rules of the road. In order to do that, I need to share my screen with you. And here we go. So first order of business is welcome, and I think we just did that. We're starting off with no videos on, because it can tend to be distracting. I think someone on the call already said that they're eating dinner, so I'm bon appetit, and we won't be distracted by eating. I remember a call I made, a webinar I was doing, where one person on the call was eating potato chips and kind of crunching away. So we don't need those kinds of distractions. But I will be asking everybody to turn their videos on when we get into the discussion portions. This is being recorded, which means if you say something, it will be recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, you can use the chat box to ask questions. I try to look over once in a while to see if there are questions going into the chat box, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to be doing that. And so if somebody else wants to ask your question for you, that can work. In terms of muting and unmuting and starting and stopping, we already covered that. When I'm going to be in presentation mode, I'm going to ask everybody to stop your videos and mute yourselves. When it's time to ask questions, I'm going to ask you to turn all of your videos on. And I'm going to ask you to turn your audio on as you are asking questions, making comments, and things like that. We are not going to be doing any polls tonight unless I'm feeling frisky enough to make one up real quick. But so we're not going to do that, so we don't have to cover that. I want you to use the chat box, which should be located on the bottom of your screen, sort of in the middle. It should say chat. And when you click on that, you'll get a separate window that allows you to put things into chat. Please remember that when you are putting something in chat, that little blue label above what you're putting in will determine whether everybody sees that, or are you saying something specifically to one person. This can get confusing when, like for example, I was presenting yesterday or the day before, and as I'm talking, I see the chat box filling up with this dialogue between two people about something that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. And they were telling everybody, and it can be confusing. So know who you're talking to when you're using your chat. And I'm not sure, considering the size of our group right now, whether we will be doing small group sessions. My only instruction for you is, if we do go into breakout groups, where you'll be talking to 3 or 4 people at a deeper level. Please go into your breakout group as soon as possible, and please participate as much as you can. It gets weird when there's 3 or 4 people in a group, but 2 people aren't talking, and so act like you're face to face with people and speak up. Asking questions means that you're going to be raising your hands, and there are 2 ways of raising your hand. One at the bottom of your screen where it says participants. When you click on that, it will say raise hand, and you get this little blue hand that appears in your window, and I can look and see who has raised their hand. The other way, if you don't know where that button is, the other way is for you to wave your meat hand around. And if you're waving it around, I will see it, and I will call on you. There are a couple of people who are on telephone, and the only way you're going to raise your hand is to actually turn your microphone on and say, hello, excuse me, I'd like to say something. And please, excuse me, give your name when you do that so that I can see which of the boxes is speaking. Okay, I think that's about it. And right now I want us to go into a time where we can do some centering. And I want us to do this centering, do a short meditation around this concept, around this statement of the Buddha, where he says, the eyes only see what the mind is prepared to comprehend. And on this, I'm going to ask all of us to center yourself. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Take a really deep breath. And then another deep breath. And then a third deep breath. And feel the oxygen and energy as it permeates your entire body. Aware of how your feet and your ankles and your legs are energized. Aware of how your knees and your hips are now energized. Aware of how your belly and your chest is now energized. Aware of how your arms are energized. Aware of how your neck and your head and your face are energized. And from this, we can move forward into our time together. So thank you. And I'm going to stop my share here. And I'm going to invite all of us to think about our time together tonight. I'm recognizing that there are a few names that I remember from last time, but there's also a lot of names I don't remember from last time. And so I had planned to do a recap, and I will do that now. And I'll spend some time, maybe 10 minutes or so, going through our first hour of our, maybe hour and a half of our discussion last time. I don't know how many of you have seen the video that we produced, but even if you saw the video, even if you were there, this will be a really good tight refresher for you to remind yourself of what we covered and to be ready for us to move forward. So I'm going to go back to sharing. And I want to, again, do this recap. The whole idea of what I was talking about last time was looking at how do we make consciousness useful? Rethinking the whole notion of consciousness. We have spent so much time thinking about consciousness being something that's in our head that we now need to start looking at it being something that is larger than that, our head and heart consciousness. That consciousness is not an accident of brain activity. Consciousness is not located in just the brain, and that the brain and the heart is the receiving agent or organ for consciousness. Another thing that we covered last time is consciousness for what? What can functional consciousness do? Why is it important for us to have a functional notion of what consciousness can do? We talked about things like functional consciousness can remove fossil carbon from the atmosphere. We gotta say, we want this to come down now, and it can come down. We can use functional consciousness to reduce and eliminate violence. We can look at consciousness as ending the true pandemic of suicide, 10 times worse than anything the coronavirus is giving us right now. And a lot of other things that we can think about and we can cover in terms of looking at how we activate a functional level of consciousness. We also talked about some conclusions around what does this functional consciousness look like. One of the things that we talked about are everything is alive, everything is consciousness, all is conscious, all is connected, that the illusion we see that I stop here and you start over there is simply an illusion. And what we need to do is to wake up from this illusion. That mind is all pervasive. It's not here, it's everywhere. Consciousness is something that's universal. It's not just for humans, but it's for all beings. And that consciousness may look very, very different from ours, but that does not mean that it's not consciousness. And this is something that I feel strongly, and I think that there's plenty of data that supports it, that the laws of physics bend toward consciousness. That the things that we think of as cut and dried, and this is one of the laws of physics, that those things can bend toward consciousness. I had some other conclusions that I articulated, including that all beings have consciousness, including humans. This is another way of getting us out of the center of the picture here and start looking at consciousness as being something that's surrounding us. We swim in a sea of consciousness, and we only try to pay attention to our own. All indigenous cultures, and I use the word keepers, were part of a first global civilization. Now, last time, we didn't talk very much about that, and so this time I want to talk a little bit more about that. That a breaker science, all the sciences we were taught in schools, are based on individuality and separation and death. And that a keeper and mender science, and by the way, menders are us, those of us who recognize that we're holding a different consciousness than the I am separate consciousness. So keeper and mender science is based on inclusivity and holistic thinking. I think the number of you are familiar with Rupert Sheldrake saying that when he went to school to start studying biology, They gave him a dead frog. And he said, I don't want to study dead frogs. I want to study life. And that's not what breaker science does. That practicing inclusivity will create and accelerate a collective consciousness or group mind. That when we blend the breaker consciousness and the keeper consciousness, we're going to form a new way of thinking on our planet. And I call that the mender form of consciousness. That we are the first menders. We're the first people who are consciously saying, let's take these two valid but have been exclusive forms of consciousness and bring them together. And that bringing together is absolutely crucial for human survival on our planet. That blended consciousness will serve as the basis of the third global civilization. Now, if the first global civilization being a keeper civilization that we've never studied in school that we're going to talk about probably in the next 20 or 30 minutes or so. The second global civilization being what we've got right now, and this is the global civilization that is killing the earth and killing human consciousness and hundreds of thousands of other species on the planet right now. And we're about to wake up into our third global civilization using a whole new way of looking at consciousness. There's a fifth form of energy, and I call that fifth form of energy Force X. We didn't talk about that much last time, and I'm not sure we're going to talk about it much tonight. We'll see if we can get that far. Okay. So in a new physics of functional consciousness, we covered these elements in that first hour and a half. We looked at Benjamin Franklin and electricity and how before Benjamin Franklin, electricity was basically a parlor game. It was this curiosity that people did experiments with in laboratories, but there was no functional use for it. Now look at us a few hundred years later, and everything that we're doing right now is functional and dependent upon electricity. So thank you, Dr. Franklin. We talked about Arthur Koestler and the concepts of coincidence and how both baby chicks and fertile eggs are smarter than we give them credit for. We talked about Rupert Sheldrake and precognition, that when it looks like your dog knows that you are coming home, it's because your dog actually knows that you're coming home. We talked about the Piach experiment, the red balloons and the baby chicks. And if you don't remember that, I will refer you to the video, which I think is pretty fascinating on that regard. We talked about mirror neurons and shared consciousness, that there are lots of times where we are borrowing each other's neurons, where I'm using some of the neurons in my head, but I'm also using some of the neurons in my neighbor upstairs and maybe somebody walking down the street. This sharing of neurons is non-local, and I could be sharing neurons with somebody on the opposite side of the planet right now. It doesn't matter. We talked about how patterning yawning is, and I'm just trying to talk about it without yawning. It's something that we do and we trigger in each other. We talked about murdering shrimp, and if you don't know what I mean about that, go back to the video. We talked about interspecies communication a little bit. And depending on where we want to go tonight, we may want to talk about that some more. The notion that all of us, or many of us, have had experiences with communication with species who are not your pets. I'm not talking about knowing when your pet is sick or something like that, but having a conversation with some crows, or having a conversation with an animal in the wild. We talked about megalithic building and how in the first global civilization, it was comprised of people who were able to build with stones that weighed not just tons, but tens of tons, hundreds of tons, and even thousands of tons of building material. We talked about standard versus blended consciousness, and we may talk more about that tonight. And we talked about the 5 latent powers, and we did that fairly extensively. And again, to just refresh your recollection, the 5 latent powers are collective telepathy and knowing, the spatial powers, being able to move through space either amazingly quickly or be instantaneously go from one place to another, spatial powers that allow you to be in more than one place at a time, to move your consciousness to more than one place at a time, etc. Temporal powers to speed up time, to slow down time, and maybe to move outside of time completely. Communication powers, to be in communication with other beings, to be in communication with other beings from other times, to be in communication with other beings who are not human. And then bodily powers, to me, from my perspective, the least important of the 5 latent powers is the ability to control your body to the point that you can stop eating food, you can stop drinking water, you can exist in conditions that are not, that would not be possible in a, I hate using the term normal, but in a normal sense. Okay, I think that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing here. So I'm going to pause now. I'm going to ask all of us to turn on our videos, because I'm going to ask you a question, and you can answer as you wish. First of all, does anybody have any questions about that? What we did last time, okay? And again, I'm not going to go extensively into the questions. I may refer you back to the video, but if you have something quick, I will be glad to answer you. And I see, Barbara, were you waving your meat appendage around?
Yes.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to let everybody know where they can see the video from last time. It's on our IONS, IONSPDX.org website, if anybody wants to go watch that. There's a link for prior meetings and videos. So if anybody wants to go watch the old video, you can do it through our website. Thanks.
Can you put the link down in the chat box?
Oh, good idea. Yes, I'll do that.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else want to say anything, ask anything within reason? Okay. So do you have a preference on what gets covered here? I'm going to spend some time in some new material talking about the first global civilization. I want to go back and take another look at this thing of interspecies communication. I'm going through my notes right now. And to look even deeper at functional consciousness. However, Is there anything else you want to bring back up or revive back from our first session? Or is there anything that you want to go further down the rabbit hole regarding looking at the blending of consciousness, looking at what we need to do to get beyond ourselves? Something in terms of the this concept that I've been calling the true human being, something that we've gotten away from, especially in this society, of being authentic to ourselves, authentic to each other, and authentic to this larger world, this larger society. So if you have any preferences along those lines, wave your meat hand around, unmute your microphone, and then ask away. Yes, Victoria.
Yeah, I like what you said about, or I would like to hear more about being the authentic person, what you mean by that, and how to be that, how to get beyond our, would you call it, breaker consciousness?
Yes, so, getting beyond breaker.
Yeah, that's an interesting term. Why breaker? Because things are broken apart, or?
Okay, so the concept of breakers, keepers, and menders I covered in this book, Creating a World That Works for All. And if you're familiar with the work of Daniel Quinn, he wrote a book called Ishmael, and then he wrote a bunch of other Ishmaelian books that came after that. And in his book, he had a concept that he called takers and leavers, okay? And basically, he's talking about indigenous people being the leavers. They leave everything alone. They leave things as they should be. And then the takers being the people of the cultures that take everything, take all the things that belong to them, and then they take everything that belongs to everybody else, okay? And I thought, and I knew Quinn, and he and I talked about this. I thought that leaving it at just these two forms of consciousness didn't do much for me, because I know that I'm not a keeper. Actually, we're talking about it right now, aren't we? I guess we'll continue to talk about it. Okay, so I know that I'm not a keeper, okay? I know that I wasn't raised honoring and revering the earth. I try to do that now, but it's something that I've tacked on. I also know that I'm not a taker, and I don't want to be a taker. So as I was putting this together for my book, I knew that there had to be a third form of consciousness, an emerging form of consciousness. And so I looked at the indigenous, what we call indigenous people. These are the people who are the first global civilization, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. And I look at how they keep to what they call the sacred hoop. They keep to the sacred ways, and it's very important to them to keep to these sacred ways. I also look at this other group, of which I was raised, that break through all these sacred ways, who break all of those relationships with the earth. They break the relationships with each other. They break the relationship even with themselves, with their own body, with their own consciousness. And therefore, I labeled them the breakers. And the third group being the menders, because guess what? Guess what we get to do? We get to put all this stuff back together again, despite the fact that we didn't break it in the first place. We can't say, oh, those people over there, they broke it, so they should fix it. Well, they should, but they don't have the consciousness that will allow them to fix it. So we'll fix it for them. And we will make ourselves powerful enough to be able to do that fixing for them. I think that covers it, and we're going to cover that some more as soon as we get to the first global civilization stuff. Anybody else have anything that they want to cover, want us to cover this evening as we are going along? Or if you're satisfied that things can go the way that they're going, I'm ready to launch in here. I see, so thumbs up, okay, great. Okay, so let me redo my slide deck and start talking about the birthing of the first global civilization and how that's leading to, okay, where did I go? How that's leading us to the third global civilization. Okay, so here's a screen share. Okay, so so what is behind and how are we dealing with? Oh yeah, I should ask all of you to again turn off your video and make sure you're muted, and we can go from there. So, and we're talking about birthing the third global civilization. The first thing that we need to understand is what is civilization? What do we mean when we say something is a civilization? Well, it's interesting. Civilization has a number of different definitions to it, and we are not going to go into academic treatises on how we are explaining these things. Although I do have two degrees, I try my very best to speak like a normal human being, using normal language and being able to talk to real people. And you'll let me know how I'm doing with that. So let's look at what civilization is. Civilization is a process by which a society or a place reaches an advanced stage of social and cultural development and organization. Look at the word advanced. Civilization, let's go to the bottom definition. Civilization is an advanced stage of organization. Now, the real definition of civilization is civilization comes from the Latin word civis, which means somebody who lives in a town. If you live in a town, you're civilized. If you don't live in what we Westerners would call a town, you are uncivilized. We have lots of definitions for people who are uncivilized. We call them savages. We call them ignorant. We call them heathens. We call them barbarians. And nobody wants to be any of those things. Back when I was growing up, when dinner time came, and from time to time, kids will stick their hand in their plate to eat their food. And my mother would say to us, "What are you, some kind of heathen? Pick up that fork." Now, we never knew what some kind of heathen was, but we knew we didn't want to be one, okay? And so that's basically where we get the notion that keepers, that indigenous people are inferior to us because they don't live in cities, they don't live in houses, they don't act like me. Now, if any of you have done any work in diversity, and if you haven't done any work in diversity, you should do some work in diversity. You'll know, if you've done any of that work, you'll see how culturally loaded all that is. Everything that we even know about how to act in the world and what a civilization means comes from comparing everybody in the world to me and my standard of living. We need to get beyond that, and hopefully we're going to take some steps right now to start us getting beyond that. So, what is civilization? We've seen this before. We know that our Western civilization, what we call civilization right now, is based on Greek civilization. And we know that Greek civilization is resting on one person, Pythagoras. All of the other Greek philosophers are indebted to Pythagoras. Socrates, Parmenides, all the rest of them refer back to Pythagoras as their source. So the question is, where did he get it from? Where did this guy who came up with this stuff that was earth shaking, literally, shaking the earth? Where did he get this from? Well, he got it from an illiterate shaman from Mongolia named Abaris. Now, how do we know that? Well, we know that because he wrote it down. He told us that's where he got it from. And for about 2,400 years, we ignored that writing. So when he says, oh yeah, I got it from this guy who was, rattling bones and doing all these shamanic practices, modern scholars said, oh, he's speaking allegorically. That couldn't be the case. Or he's speaking about, the gods on in the sky. He couldn't be serious that everything he knows came from this illiterate guy named Abaris. Well, there's a scholar of ancient Greek named Peter Kingsley, and he wrote a book called A Story Waiting to Pierce You. The subtitle being Mongolia, Tibet, and the Destiny of the Western World. I highly recommend you read that book. When I read the book, and actually it was only one paragraph out of that book, sent me on a quest to the other side of the world, to a cave in the Himalayas at the 15,000 foot level. That's how powerful this writing was. I guess the story that was waiting to pierce one pierced me. So he's talking about Mongolia and Tibet and Ladakh is northern India, which the Chinese army is trying to turn into southern China right now. He called this, the ancient kingdom there, Zhang Zhung. So Zhang Zhung, if you look at it on the map, and I hope you can see my pointer here, Zhang Zhung was based right around here. So part China, part Tibet, part Ladakh. And so when I was in that region, I was in this corner of it. And I went there specifically to be on the trail of civilization, of this first great civilization. From Zhang Zhung, people went everywhere. We know that one of the routes of the people of Zhang Zhung was to go, when Abaris went from this region over to Greece and zapped this guy who became Pythagoras, the founder of Western civilization. They went north, they went in all directions, and in every direction they went, they were, let's call it a civilizing force, but they didn't create any towns. They created a consciousness, and that consciousness went around the world, and they went with it. This is a very interesting map. This is a map of the world done by Buckminster Fuller. every flat map you've seen is distorted, and it has to be distorted because when you take a round globe and you try to project it onto a flat surface, it doesn't project carefully or evenly. And you get these very odd gaps and very odd. So if you look at North America, if you look at a flat map of it, it looks like Greenland is larger than the North American continent, when in reality, this is Greenland, and it's not larger than North America. It's a really big island, but it's not larger than North America. And according to to archaeologists, they start looking at how people started coming out of this region, and the map starts to look like this. So people from Zhang Zhung went into India. Again, Abaris said they went into, Pythagoras said they went to Greece and went to Egypt, and then from Egypt down into the rest of Africa, north into Siberia and forming the Siberian culture, into China, into and through Taiwan, from Taiwan into what is Polynesia, and down into Australia, down into New Zealand, to all the rest of the islands, and either across the land bridge and into North America and South America, or directly across the ocean into South America. There's new evidence that says that there are people from South America who are who got there not over the land bridge, but by directly traveling that way. So this starts to look an awful lot like a global human civilization. It looks even more that way when you start looking at the people who did this. When you start looking at breaker anthropology, they look for differences. In our Mender anthropology, we're looking for similarities. If you start looking at these people, start looking across their cultures and across their continents. These are 5 people, 5 completely different continents, and they all look alike. I always find it amazing that when we're looking at things and looking for things, we see what we want to see. If I want to see these people as all separate, then I'm going to see them as all separate. If I start looking across the separations and start looking at them as one, then I will see them as one. So here are 3 women, 3 completely different continents, all of them with tattoos on their chins. Now, maybe the chin is just a really big area that people need to get tattooed, or maybe they're calling forth their ancestral knowing. Maybe they're using their 5 latent powers to see across the continents, across the thousands and thousands of miles that separate them, and calling forth elements of commonality for them and elements of beauty for them. Okay. So when you start looking for the Zhang Zhung similarities, there's the look. I mean, if you start looking at people across their differences, you start seeing this common physicality, a common language. And this is, and I don't mean they all speak the same language, although it'd be very interesting to get people from these regions and find out if there are common words, and etc. But in my travels, I have heard a common patterning for language. And the patterning goes like this. And again, for those of you who don't know, I've been to 45 different countries around the world. I have been to at least 120, maybe 130 or more different cultures. I only speak one language, and it's not even English, it's American. We find out how limited our language is as we're doing this traveling. So for most people speaking, the language just sounds like the twittering of birds. But when you're listening to the twittering, you start to pull out some interesting commonalities. Where I have been, the commonalities go like this. There's speaker A and then there's speaker B. And it goes blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. So this is, I'm saying something, and this was, I heard you, or I'm repeating what you said. I'm saying something else, I repeat. I was saying something else. When I went to the Maori in New Zealand, I heard this. When throughout Indonesia, I've heard this. In China, I've heard this. Everywhere I've heard this patterning. Now, it's not from a breaker anthropological perspective, you'd say, oh, that's an interesting coincidence, but these people couldn't be in contact with each other, so therefore they couldn't be talking this way. It's only a coincidence. If you look at the 5 latent powers and these folks having those powers, you start to see things differently. One more thing about being in among the Maori in New Zealand. One of the Maori elders was asking me what was I doing there, and I was very reluctant to talk about all this because it was, getting into talking about a civilization like Zhang Zhung that I'd never heard of this before I read the Peter Kingsley book, etc. So I'm being not evasive, but a little bit circumspect. And he's pressing me. So he's like, well, what? And I said, what I'm looking for is the roots of Zhang Zhung. And he looks at me, he says, Sang Sung? I'm like, I don't know if it's the same thing. He says, that was when we could fly. And in his ancient wisdom was a time when human beings had powers that would allow them to fly. And he called it Sang Sung. And they're calling it Zhang Zhung. And if we start asking about this, we may see this as the root of a lot of the keeper cultures. The next piece is culture, clothing, and customs. You start looking at how people interact with the world. You start seeing some very interesting kinds of things. If you go back to the pictures I was showing you earlier, your clothing is nature. You're wrapped in the skins and the fabrics and the textures that's growing all around you. Your house is what grows all around you. What you're writing is what grows all around you. You are in nature. Another thing is our values. The Zhang Zhung values are very similar. And this is true for indigenous people, no matter where they are on the planet. The 3 principal values of these of the Zhang Zhung civilizations and the keeper civilizations that are the descendants. Number 1, having a relationship to and a reverence for the earth. Having a relationship to and a reverence for all beings. And that includes, but is not exclusive to human beings. And then 3rd, having a relationship to, and working with transcendence, the notion of a trans-sensory reality, that reality does not stop at your five senses, being part of the dream time. And you know, the dream time is the reality that the keepers in Australia talk about. The keepers in Australia being the culture, the longest running continuous culture on our planet. Right now, breaker anthropologists pin that culture back 40,000 years, 50,000 years. Some of them go as far back as 75,000 years. These folks have been living on that land and living in the dream time. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to invite us to turn on our videos. And for those who wish to say something about that, I'm going to ask you to put up your digital hand or your meat hand and get you to ask a question or make a statement or however you wish to do this. And I'm talking really slow like this to get people who might be a little bit shy to speak up or put their digital hand up or to and if you don't, and this is not an idle threat, I'll keep talking. So Helen, I see she took the bait. Okay. So Helen, I'm not hearing you. And it looks like you are unmuted too. Do you have a mute on your computer that you are, is there a mute button on your cord? Not getting a peep out of you. Okay, I'll let you work on that, okay? I do want to hear what you got to say.
I have a suggestion that might help. Helen, can you hear me? If you go down to on the bottom left hand of your screen where you have the little microphone and there's a caret that says mute, if you can adjust your settings, your microphone might be turned way down. If you go to audio settings on the bottom, that might help.
Okay. You can also select different microphones too. So you may have different audio devices and things like that that show up on that the caret that Barbara just talked about. Anyone else while Helen is getting herself sorted out here? Any other thoughts or any other, what were your impressions by any of that? Does any of that make sense? Does any of that sound like complete garbage to you? I mean, like, how is that striking?
I'll jump in while Helen's fiddling around.
Okay.
I thought that was fascinating. Thanks, Shariff. I thought that was very interesting, really good background in history. And I agree with you about the commonalities. And I've often thought that there was so much that, even though they were across the globe, there's a lot of similarities. So thanks for sharing with that.
Now, this is not to say that this first global civilization was perfect in any way. It's just that they had powers that we didn't have, and they had a value structure that allowed them to be one with the earth. Okay.
Do you think
So
do you think that those are powers we don't have, or powers that we have forgotten how to tap into?
Right. So This is the essence. Okay, so remember, when I went to the Himalayas, I went there for the answer to that question. Where does those powers come from? And how do I find the on switch? How do I get this stuff turned on? And the answer was very specific. And the answer was, they cannot be turned on by a human being who's thinking as an individual. If you believe that you're an individual, you can't get it. Now, I get immediate pushback. Oh, we've got things like, we know what ESP is, and we know what telepathy is, and we know what non-local viewing is, etc. And my analogy is like, this is like the sparks that shoot off when you walk across a carpet with your sock feet. Okay, you get a little spark here and a spark there. That's nothing compared to all the electricity being generated by the Bonneville Dam right now. We have the ability to alter what we call reality. And I don't mean just for me. I can take some chemicals. Oh wow, I'm altering my reality here. But no, we have the power to alter all of our realities, to be able to operate on a completely different level. How many of you, show of meat hands, are familiar with a book series called The Masters of the Far East? Okay, so 2 of us, okay. So in that, the author, who's a Westerner, is going around with these folks in the Far East who are exhibiting the 5 latent powers. So they leave this guy in one village, and they go on this arduous trek to this other village, and they find he just teleported himself over there. He didn't have to do the walking. He just got, boom, okay, I'm over there now. And so that's the stuff that we collectively will be able to do once we collectively get over our preoccupation with ourselves. This is the Dalai Lama's conceptualization of the main ill of Western society. We are preoccupied with this one as an individual. And once we open the doors, not just to all human beings, but once we recognize the consciousness of all beings, we'll see things very differently. So Oshi, I see your hand is up, but I'm going to check in with Helen first to see whether she is whether we're hearing her or not. And you have to say something. Nope, can't do it. No, we'll come back. Don't worry. We've got time. We'll come back. Let me get Oshi next, and then Teresa. So Oshi.
So what you've been saying this recent period of time reminds me of the daily quotes that I'm getting from Krishnamurti, and talking so much about not seeing the individual. So that I connected with his teachings. And what you said before in your presentation, I thought about the movie Out of Darkness, about the very early African civilization and what has happened to them. So that was interesting, but it's very exciting what you're telling us, and it does resonate with other things that I have intuited besides what I have read. And so thank you. I'm very much enjoying this.
Well, number one, thank you. I'm very much enjoying doing this. this is kind of like this. Someone said to me, you know, cows need to milk and teachers need to teach. And if you don't milk your cow, the cow can be in pain. Mm-hmm. And if I'm sitting here and I'm kind of, you know, doing all this stuff for myself, it needs to get shared. And so thank you. Mm-hmm. We could talk for a while about Krishnamurti and the whole notion of his transcending all the teaching that Blavatsky and all the other folks were trying to give him to make him this individual kind of Jesus figure, and how he became, literally how he became himself. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the end, about what does it mean to actually truly become yourself. And you mentioned the movie, and when you did, I thought about the movie Dances with Wolves, which I thought was a really, really good movie. Here's a guy who knows nothing about native culture, and through a series of encounters, some of them less fortunate than others, he gets not just a knowledge, but a true appreciation of this culture. I watched the movie several times, but I've only watched the ending of it once. I couldn't see it again. It was more than I cared to. When the other Westerners showed up, I was like, okay, time to turn something else on. One other idea around this. No, let me do this idea later. Teresa, I think you had your hand up. Yes, no.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up something that was mentioned the other day by Dean Radin, the top scientist at IONS.
Yeah, Dean and I are buddies. Yeah.
Okay, well, they've been doing some research into who's got psychic abilities and who doesn't. And they haven't published anything yet. And he kind of said this on the QT a little bit in this talk I was on. But anyway, they're saying that there's kind of a negative correlation between people whose lineage is from Europe, because of basically when the Catholics, Christians went around Europe, basically killing anybody and everybody who had any kind of healing ability or psychic ability, et cetera, much like the pilgrims were burning witches. That seemed to,
put a damper on things.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was very fascinating that he said he was linking it to, I want to say exomes, which might be appearing in DNA or junk DNA. Don't quote me on all the other stuff, but yeah, they are linking it to something in DNA. So that's something we've all carried forward when our ancestors who had these great abilities were, prematurely killed off, I guess.
Yes, and not only is it because the ancestors were killed off, those who survived that energy, the energy of supreme joy and the energy of supreme trauma, imprints on your DNA. And you then can inherit that, which is downright freaky when you see it, okay? So one of my teachers from Sri Lanka would say, if you have a behavior that you repeat for 5 or 10 years, it becomes a habit. And if you repeat that behavior for 5 or 10 more years, that behavior will imprint on your DNA and your children can inherit it.
Wow.
So with my youngest child, and I'm not going to go into the sordid details of her birth. I tease her all the time, though. I said, you're the only child I have where I know date, time, place, and position of conception, okay? We did not share any of our lives. When I first met her, she was 3 years old, okay? And so we've never been in each other's space. I mean, I would visit her, I'd visit my daughters, including her. They would visit me, but we never spent more than a week or two in each other's space. And this is the kid that acts the most like me. It is downright freaky, you know? And if you watch the two of us, we will cut our food the same way. We answer the telephone the same way. We do, and yeah, I'll just have to. I say to her from time to time, "Cut that out." How do you, you know? It would drive her mother insane. But all those things carry forward on your DNA. And so when you talk about this correlation. Because of all of the traumatic events from Charlemagne on up or down, people of European descent have been, I shouldn't say, okay, many people of European descent have been stripped of that connection to a natural world, have been stripped of that connection to their own ancestry. But the cool thing is we can rejoin it anytime we want to. This is one of the beliefs of breaker reality that we can change. The past isn't gone. It's just sitting there waiting for us. This happened here in the Portland region, further up the Columbia River some years ago. NPR was doing some research on and I don't remember the name of the keepers, the particular tribe that did this, but these folks started building a longhouse. The first time in 100 years or more that they started building a longhouse. And they asked them, why are you building a longhouse now after 100 years or so? And they said, we had a sign. And the sign was, our children started singing songs that our ancestors taught us. The oldest people in the village remember hearing their parents singing the songs that the 10 or 12-year-olds are singing right now, okay? So that knowledge just skipped a couple of generations and then there it was, okay? I want to tell you another quick story involving my children, and I'm going to try to make this quick. When it was time, with all three of my daughters, I told them that they should be really, really smart. They should get scholarships. They should put themselves through college. I put myself through college. I was really, really smart. Be smart like me. I'm not putting any money into your college. And all three of them put themselves through, between the three of them, I think there's 6 or 7 degrees right now. Okay, so each of them, when it came time for them to go to school, would consult me. And when my eldest said she was going to go to Virginia State University, which is an historically Black college, I said, fine. She's living in Virginia at the time to get an in-state credit. Virginia State's one of the good schools. There are some of the historically Black colleges that should be shut down. Some of them are the peers of places like Harvard or Yale or Stanford. And Virginia State was kind of up there, being a state-supported school. So good move. 3 years later, her sister is time for her to go to school, and she says, I'm going to go to Virginia State. And at the time, her family is living in Florida. And I said, if you want to go to an historically Black college, there's some great ones in Florida, and you get an in-state credit. And your sister's, you're only going to have 1 year of overlap with your sister. So we argued about this over several phone calls, okay? And she wound up going to Virginia State. 7 years later, the young one I just finished telling you about, it's her time to go to Virginia, to go to school. She says, I'm going to go to Virginia State. And I went berserk. It's like there are at least 11,000 colleges and universities in America. Pick another one, okay? This time they're living in Georgia. So there's some great schools in Georgia if you want to go to a historically Black college. I said, your grades are good enough. You could get into my colleges, Clark University in Massachusetts and Boston University. I can help you get in there. We went to war, and one of the things that she acts just like me is that she's amazingly hard-headed. So she went to Virginia State. When she was in a sophomore in college, I got appendicitis for the first time, and my sister put out in the family network that I was dying in a hospital in Oregon. So all by myself. So all these family people are calling me, and they're praying for me. And you know that prayers don't work unless you're actually on the telephone with the person. So they're going, heal, and I'm like, okay. So when we got calmed down, I would talk to them, and one of them was a woman that would be my mother's age, my mother's cousin, and I said, kind of, where are you calling from? And she said, Petersburg, Virginia. And I said, oh, my daughter goes to school in Petersburg, Virginia. And she says, who's your daughter? And I said, Zainab Abdullah. And she said, she's upstairs. She was renting a room from her cousin, who is on the board of directors of Virginia State University, as all of the directors of Virginia State University are, because it's a family school. The buildings are named by people for people in my DNA line. It was founded by people in my DNA line. They're taking courses from their cousins, and I didn't know that, and they didn't know that, but the DNA knew it. They knew where they belonged, despite me arguing strenuously that you shouldn't go there, okay? Now, there are a couple of things about that. One of them is the fact that, why didn't I know this? Well, I didn't know it because I needed to have a different trajectory, and don't ask, I follow orders, I don't ask why, okay? And why didn't my mother tell me? Well, because I was supposed to go, I had to go in this other direction. But I'm so happy and so proud that my daughters got the message. I'm sitting here oblivious, and they got the message, oh, and by the way, the Abdullah girls were famous on campus. They were the best students. They're the friendliest folks. Everybody wanted to hang out with them. They were the social butterflies. They excelled at that school because they were in their environment, even though they didn't know they were in their environment. Okay. So thank you for letting me tell that story, because that will be happening more and more. We're actually going to be seeing species that we thought were extinct coming back, because the space will be created as we move breaker culture aside. Right now, we're seeing species moving into the cities. How many times have we heard since the lockdown? Herds of elk going through these towns, the bighorn sheep going through the towns. I'm waiting for a bear to come walking down Broadway, you know.
Hey, well,
And
Sharif, just, I gotta interrupt. There is a bear in my neighborhood running around. They're trying to figure out how to capture him. And I live on the east side of Portland.
yeah.
Black bear.
You know, and yeah, good luck with that, because that won't be the only one, okay? This is what they're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be living with nature, not nature being an imposition on us. Yeah, thanks for telling me that. When I'm walking out at night, I'm going to be looking out for the bears now. Excellent, excellent. Any other questions or comments that we need to do here? Let me know. And if not, oh, Belvy, yay! It's been a while.
It has been.
Yes.
Just a very quick kind of response that was generated as I was listening. I was several years ago in Africa, and I was in Zimbabwe and Tanzania at that time, and I was traveling with Danny Glover, and somehow, because they were film people, this story came up about this film being made in Africa, and they needed a lion, but they brought the lion from LA. I guess that lion had an Asian, and the lions running around in Africa didn't have Asian for whatever reason.
Exactly.
They brought a lion from the LA Zoo to Africa to, be in this film. And one of the things that everybody kept noticing is, and then they hired all these different people to dress them up as Maasai and different da-da-da-da. But one of the things they noticed about this one lion was that when he was in his cage, every time a Maasai came to the cage, he would just go crazy and quiver and, and so then, the director and everybody thought, well, let's just dress people up that look like Maasai. They dressed them up, looked like Maasai. The lion didn't respond.
Right.
Then they bring him Maasai. But what was interesting, because it's what got me into epigenetics via the animal, was that this was a 4th generation lion from America.
Yep.
Who, and they were saying, though, when they brought in a shaman, was that for the Maasai, historically, the rite of passage for a Maasai was to kill a lion. You had to go out alone into the wilderness,
right,
and either you came back or you didn't. And if you came back, you had killed the lion. So that the Maasai had a particular relationship. And I was just astonished that here was a lion that was not born in Africa, that had his mother, mother had not been born in Africa, but would still have that kind of deep, energetic response. And so I was glad I was hanging out with film people, because you don't hear that, it was their story.
Yeah, no, that is so powerful. The beings in nature know. And I've been in several different places on the planet looking at a being, a wild being, not domesticated, and they will stop, they'll see human beings kind of going in front, and they'll stop and look at me. And I'm like, do I look like lunch? What exactly is the deal here? But there is an awareness of consciousness. So when I'm looking at them, I'm seeing more than, there's a caribou, or there's a deer, or there's a turtle. I'm looking at, there's a consciousness. And that consciousness goes back to the roots of the earth. So I don't remember if I told the story about having double vision with the being in Sri Lanka. It sounds like, okay. So I spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka, and I would, this one time I woke up, I was clearly awake, but I hadn't opened my eyes yet. I'm waiting for my alarm to go off. And I've got an image in my head, although my eyes are closed. And the image is looking in my window from outside. The window's right above my head. And I'm looking down through my mosquito netting at myself, at the top of my head and my body. And this obviously is not a normal way of looking at things, especially with your eyes closed. And so I very slowly opened my eyes, and I could see the top of my mosquito netting, and superimposed on that, I could see this other view at the top of my head, and I could see my eyes opening and looking up at the top of the mosquito netting. And the color was off. The color was not the same colors. I couldn't describe it. So I very slowly raised my head backwards to look out. And at that point, the view went from the top of my head to the outside wall. And then the view disappeared completely. So I jumped up, looked out the window, didn't see anything. I ran around to outside where my window is. And sitting on the ledge where the being would have watched me, there was a fresh, steamy turd from a being who had spent the entire night eating mangoes. Okay, so this is a mango turd, okay? And my first thought was to be really pissed off. It's like, this is an insult. And then I started thinking, like that being, what do beings use turds for? They use they use their urine and they use their feces to introduce themselves to each other. So this being saying, oh, I'm fresh out of business cards. Here's one for you. Now, so I know that this was not a monkey. This was something other than a monkey. It was sizable, okay. From the turd, it was a mammal. And I don't know what it was, but I could see through its eyes. Now, keepers talk about being able to do that, to being able to when they are hunting, to become one, literally one with the being that they are hunting. And if there's 7 or 8 different hunters, that those hunters will act as one. I'm coming in from this side, you're coming in from that side. You're the one that's going to rush first. We know you're not going to catch it because you're just going to flush them out to me, okay? Because I'm going to catch it. And then we all are going to share that. So this part of me flushes it, and this part of me catches it, and this part of me cleans it, and all of me gets to partake of it. When we think like that, how in the world can homelessness exist if we are one? How in the world can hunger exist when we are one? It's a whole other way of looking at things. Here in Portland, we said to the homeless community, we can't, we don't have the money to build housing. We can't support you. We can't house you. We can't do anything. As soon as COVID comes, oh, gee, we can house all of you. We're going to put you all right over there. Now, we did that not because we cared anything for the homeless people. We did that to protect ourselves. What happens when we get rid of that head and start really thinking about things being we are one, and start really awakening all the powers to do that, we start dealing with the world in a completely different way. And that's the way I've been working for the past 30, 40 years. And it's just really cool to see it coming about right now. We can go in a couple of different directions, and we on this call all know the direction that we need to go in. And I have no idea how the time just got to what it is. Let me see what else we were going to cover. We may have to do this at another point in time. Definitely not next month. I don't know if we talked about the issue of respecting. Oh, we did. Respecting and disrespecting keeper consciousness. We talked about the horse boy. I think you remember that. And if you don't, then definitely get the last video, because I don't want to spend another 10 minutes talking about the horse boy. But even when Westerners are taking the gifts that keepers give, even while they're taking the gift, they will deny the gift. They'll say, this isn't real, or this isn't certain, or we have to study this more, or this is an old wives' tale. Oh, thank you very much, but yeah, this is an old wives' tale. And so our consciousness is that we are going to be open to all of the things that are being given to us, not making any of it bad or wrong or evil, recognizing that we are in the process of opening ourselves to a whole new reality, and we will become one with that reality. I'm inviting other people to ask questions or comments. I do want to say one more thing, but I can pause for a second to see if somebody's been trying to jump in here. Teresa, jump away.
What is your favorite tool that you would advise us to use to become better menders? How can we be more intentional? What kind of a tool do you have?
As I said the last time, the tools, almost all of us are familiar with the tools of getting to the point of blending our consciousness. Meditation, when I meditate by myself, I become a better person. When I meditate with all of you, we all become a better person, okay? So meditation with others, chanting, bells, incense, candles. I mean, we group movement, group body movement. We've got all this stuff. The question is, are we going to do this, continue to do this by ourselves? Or are we going to start doing this with the other? However you see the other, however you are conceptualizing the other. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. About 20, maybe 25 years ago, we put together a series of discussion groups we called the Commons Cafe. We did this all around the country. This was actually pretty successful. And in the Commons Cafe, we would take people who were either actual or potential adversaries, and we would sit them down face to face, no buffers between them, and they would be responding to a set of questions. And as they are talking, they start weaving themselves closer and closer together. And I've got great videos around this. I could talk about Commons Cafe for the next couple of hours, but I won't. But during the cafe, I had one cafe where the issue was class. And at every table, she had like 10, 15 tables or so. At every table, there was a homeless person, a working class person, a student, a comfortably middle class person, and a wealthy person. They don't know who they are. All they know is, I've got a name tag on it that says John or Jane or Jim. And they don't even know what the topic is that night, okay? I know that is class, and I know that each person at the table has one of these characteristics. So I go to the tables and I'm listening in at the conversation. And the wealthy guy, at one of the tables, the wealthy guy is saying to the homeless guy, "You're not homeless." And the other people at the table are like, okay. And the guy said, he expounded. He said, you know, homeless people are kind of insane and they're pushing shopping carts down the street. And you and I are having this really nice conversation. Homeless people, you know, are drug addicts, etc. And you're like clean and upstanding and neat, etc. And, you know, you and I are really relating to each other, so you can't be homeless. And everybody turned to the homeless guy. And he said, well, you know, thank you. I'm enjoying the conversation too. I try to keep myself neat and clean. I try to take a shower every day. And I don't have a home. I live in a shelter, you know. And everybody turned back to the rich guy. And they were modifying their own life perspective in real time, face to face. Now, needless to say, this doesn't work on Zoom. This doesn't work when you are in whatever your environment is and you have no idea what my environment is. Also in that same evening, I was at another table. The only thing I don't like about the Commons Cafe is that I don't get to talk. Okay, so I'm walking around with tape over my mouth, and I go to another table, and the middle class guy is saying, well, something about implicate order and the research of David Peat. And the homeless guy says, you're not talking about David Peat, you're talking about David Bohm. And he goes on to talk about what Bohm was saying. And the middle class guy is like, how can you be poor when you're educated? You know, and it's like, what do you understand about poverty? What do you believe about poverty? And so, so the key to me is we need to sit down together and work out how do we blend our consciousness. Okay, so number one. Number two, we need to make sure that all of us are in the same room at the same time. It took some doing for me to get a homeless person, a working class person, a student, in the room. It took some weeks of working to get that to happen. And once it happened, boom, there it is, and we can all begin to have that conversation. So when we get ready to do that, and we're not ready to do that, and we have to be within touching distance of each other. If you're not, it doesn't work. You're familiar with the heart math work that says that our heart energy radiates out from us several feet, okay? We've got to be able to sit in that energy. And the most important thing about it is that there's got to be food in front of you. No food, no conversation. Put the food there, put some coffee there, put some pizza there, put some donuts there, and all of a sudden, you're my best friend. It's amazing how it works. I can show you video. Okay, one more thing about this. Okay, this is something we noticed in the big, the Commons cafes that we did here in Portland were small. And by small, we mean between 50 and 80 people. The ones we did in other cities were really big. The biggest ones were in Denver with 500 people, in Omaha, Nebraska. At 750 people, the fire marshal said, you're not putting anybody else in that room. And we had 100 people trying to get in, you know, so this is really big stuff, you know. So we did, we noticed something we call the flop factor. When the conversation starts, everybody is like I am right now. I'm sitting straight in my chair. I'm looking and talking at you. If I had something to eat or drink, I would be drinking like this. I'd be smiling from time to time, but I'm sitting straight up. Within 30 to 45 minutes, everybody at all the tables would flop forward and put their elbows on the table, and that's the place where the conversation gets good. Once everybody's elbows hit the table, we're home free, okay? It takes a crowbar to break them up. You know, we've had conversations go to the point where we've had security people come in like, we've got to empty this room now, and then they'll go and they'll keep talking outside. So, so anyway, so this is really powerful stuff. We know how to do it. What we need to do is do it, okay? And when we are ready, when Commonway is ready, and when IONS is ready, let's talk about how we put some of this on and move forward. And let's go ahead and do this. So,
that sounds great.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'd like to stay involved with that.
Yeah. And everything I do is an experiment. We have no idea what the result is going to be. We're just making it up, and we are paying attention to the results, and we're ready to take it on to the next level and the next level. I want to open the door to anyone who has not had an opportunity to talk yet. If you wish to have an opportunity, raise your digital hand or wave your meat hand, and we can deal with that. I want to say something about what's coming up for me. Well, gee, I thought I put something up here. And I am looking. Okay, well, I'll talk about it very indirectly then. I'm doing two-part workshops in June. One part is on the series of solutions beyond diversity. There are like 5 or 6 different modules on this, and the first one we'll cover in June is the module on engaging the other. How do we connect with and deal with the people who are not like us, who are not like me? And the dates on that are, I'm looking at a June calendar, the 16th of June and the 23rd of June. And then on the 18th of June and the 25th of June, we're going to be having a workshop. We're going to have a two-part workshop on becoming a true human being. This is what we were talking about before in terms of looking at ourselves in terms of our levels of authenticity. So in terms of the True Human Beings workshop, we'll be looking at how do we become mindful, and not mindful the way that all of the different teachers are talking about, but how do we become, let's call it meta-mindful, mindful of the all, mindful of the one, mindful of the of everything and your impact on everything. How do we enter the land that Rumi talks about in terms of being the true human being, of being so authentic to yourself and to all of the aspects of yourself that you can learn to shine in the world? How do we spend our time learning how we become one? Not one on a theoretical level, but one on an actual level. And then how do we become visionary? How do we clear our vision so that we see beyond all of the smoke screens that are coming at us at all directions? And how do we find the path of truth in all of that? And finally, how do we become compassionate actors in the world? How do we practice more than what I call shallow compassion? Shallow compassion is, how am I going to help those nasty, dirty, stinky people down there? Okay. And inclusive compassion being, how do we practice our lovingness with all of us? I thought I was going to have something to share with you, but I don't have it to share with you. I'll put it in the comment section of the video once the video gets processed, and I would invite you to participate. I'm looking forward to presenting it. I'm looking forward to something that one of my teachers said. She said there's only two rules in life. Number one, stay centered. Number two, get back to your center when you forget rule number one. That's it. I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I think that's something that we're all always working on.
Yeah.
Is there a link that you can add to that for people
I'll put dates, times, places, and links in the video that I send out. Yes, I'm finalizing the web pages and stuff like that right now. So, yes.
Are these in-person seminars or
unfortunately? So I am not trusting that we're going to be able to be in person in June, and so this is going to be on Zoom, followed up by real, honest to God meet gatherings in. As I've told you, I practice reasonable. I have taken reasonable precautions in the face of what I consider to be a real pandemic. The people who say that this is a hoax are just not paying attention to reality. However, the reason that America has been slammed by this is not a function of the virus. It's a function of our mishandling of the virus. In two cities, New York City and Singapore. New York City has thousands and thousands of deaths and hundreds of deaths per day. Singapore, city of 6 million people, have had 21 deaths. Not 21 a day, not 2,100, just 21. And that's the only difference is they have done something that we still have not done. We haven't started doing it yet. One of the things that happens, I get excited. I start pushing things onto my keyboard, and my whole screen goes crazy. So I'm back now. I will. The last time we just had to go over. We don't have to go over this time, unless we just want to. But I've just really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed being able to present this to an understanding audience. I look forward to connecting with us both on further Zoom calls, but also in real life, in living 3D. I don't know if I know how to act anymore in 3D. And see where we go in our new normal, and looking at our life from a different lens. So thank you for doing this. And Teresa, I don't know if you have any last words you want to say. If not,
I would like to say, can everybody here just, clap your hands, say thank you to the Sharif, because it's just always so fun to have him on, and we so appreciate you.
Let's unmute and say thanks.
Thank you.
Yes,
you.
it was wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks. Very,
Good,
very
thank you.
interesting.
Good presentation. Thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
And we look forward to getting the video so we can reach out again to you, and if people want to come to the
I will
the next
try
session.
Right. I'll try my very best to process this as soon as possible and get this to you. So I'll put it up on YouTube, and then I will give you that link. Great. And then you take it on to your network, and we go on from there.
Terrific. Thanks.
Good. So if everybody unmutes themselves, including on the phone, I think it's *6 that unmutes you. And we can all just say a goodbye, and we can go from there.
Thank you, everybody who came.
Thank you. Yes, thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Yeah. See you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharif.
Yeah. Bye.
Yes, thanks.